Welcome to my YouTube channel. To all of you, my returning subscribers, thank you very much for your support. You guys have been awesome. And if you are dropping by for the first time, please like this video, hit the subscribe button, and strike the bell notification. That way, you will be the very first to know anytime I create any new content. Thank you very much as you do so. So in this video, we are going to be talking about how to boost security in the AWS command line. We're going to see how to also create objects in AWS from the command line. We're going to be looking at the command line. We'll talk about what it is. We'll see how to get started with it. We'll see how to gain access to the command line securely, talking about things like the access keys and the secret access keys. We'll talk about multi-factor authentication and other ways we can secure the command line. We'll then see how to create objects within the AWS command line, and of course we'll be testing some of our configurations along the way. As usual, we'll lay the foundations on the concepts in the first part of the video. Subsequently, we'll dive into the command line interface and create all of the objects that we want to create, and we are going to see some of the things that we need to do. This promises to be a very exciting session. I guarantee you definitely will learn a number of things from this session. This is one of those sessions that you do not want to miss. So please stay to the end, and thank you very much as you do so. So we're going to be looking at how we could create objects with the command line interface in AWS. We're going to see how to do that securely. So let's get started. We're going to be describing and discussing some of the things you see here. For example, we'll talk about the command line interface, what it is, how to get started with it. We'll talk about the components that we would need to configure the command line interface, talking about the access keys and the secret access keys. We'll talk about roles and multi-factor authentication. We'll talk about securing the AWS command line interface, and we would actually see how to create objects with the command line interface, and then we'll wrap everything up. So what is the command line interface? Well, it is a tool, and this tool allows you to manage your AWS services efficiently from the command line, and you can control multiple services and even multiple accounts. It allows you to automate tasks by the use of scripts, and what that means is it is an important tool for developers and for administrators. And you can do a number of things with it. You can manage a lot of your services efficiently. You can execute commands quickly from the CLI. And to get started with the CLI, you've got to install it depending on the environment that you want to use. You can install it on Windows. We are going to be demonstrating that in this video. You could also install it for Linux and for Mac OS. So to do that, you've got to download it, of course, from the appropriate page, which I'm going to be sharing with you in a minute. And then, of course, after you've installed it, you've got to configure the command line interface with the appropriate credentials, where you are going to be prompted to enter all of the things that you need to be able to access your environment from the command line. And after that, you want to verify that the command line is properly installed, and you would be using the AWS version command. Once you do that, it's going to display the version of the command line that is installed on your system. We're going to demonstrate all of this. So the access key and the secret access key are also very important when you are using the command line interface, because they serve as your credentials, giving you authentication and authorization to your AWS environment and giving you access to all of the AWS services that you are authorized to access. Now, the access key is a unique identifier, and this identifier is used by AWS to identify your account or the IAM user that is making the API calls. It is the public component of your credentials, and it is used in conjunction with the secret access key to grant you programmatic access to AWS. Now, the secret access key, of course, as you can imagine, is the private component of your credentials. And it is secret. It should be known to you and you alone. It is used for authentication and to ensure that the request is coming from a legitimate source. What that means is you've got to keep it safe and you should never share it. And it is a combination of the two that is going to grant you access. That is the access key on the one hand and the secret access key. So signing in would require that you've got the two, and it would involve creating a signature that AWS can use to verify that you are indeed the person that is making the request and you have the appropriate permissions. So that will now determine what you can do within the AWS environment. Now, securing the command line is very important. Why? Because, of course, it allows you to access all of the things that you require within the AWS environment. So one of the things you want to bear in mind is you want to use IAM roles. So you want to assign IAM roles to your resources rather than giving them long-term access keys. And that's going to minimize the risk of credential exposure. You may also want to use temporary security credential that is provided by IAM roles, which would be automatically rotated and would have a shorter lifespan. Now, another thing you want to do is to enable multi-factor authentication because it adds an extra layer of security, ensuring that even if your credentials were to be compromised, unauthorized access would be prevented. And you may also want to configure MFA for command line interface access by using the appropriate commands, which we are going to also demonstrate later. Of course, encryption is very important. You want to store your credentials securely, and you want to encrypt them with the appropriate tools, like, for example, the AWS Secrets Manager or the AWS Systems Manager Parameter Store. You also want to avoid hard coding credentials within your scripts. Rather, you want to use environment variables or configuration files with the appropriate access control mechanisms in place. Now, the principle of least privilege is also very, very key. You want to grant the minimum permissions that's necessary for your users or your roles to perform the appropriate task. And you want to regularly review and update all of these policies in order to ensure that they follow the principle of least privilege. And then, of course, you want to use conditions within your policies that are going to restrict access based on factors like maybe IP addresses, time of the day, or specific AWS services. And you want to regularly rotate your access keys. And that's going to minimize the risk of unauthorized access. And the recommended period would be to rotate your keys at least every 90 days. You might also want to use the IAM Access Analyzer to automate key rotation and to monitor for unused or inactive keys. Now, monitoring is very important here. You want to use tools like CloudTrail, allowing you to log all of the API calls made through the AWS command line and helping you to monitor and audit activities for security and compliance. AWS Config will also allow you to track changes to all of your resources and to ensure that they comply with your security policies. Talking about endpoints, you want to use secure endpoints, meaning that you would be staying with HTTPS endpoints, ensuring that all of your communications with AWS services are encrypted using HTTPS. You might also want to use VPC endpoints, which will securely connect to AWS services using connections that are private to the AWS environment without passing through the public internet. And then finally, you want to use different CLI profiles. You want to create profiles for different environments. You might have multiple environments like test development and production, and that's going to allow you to isolate access and to reduce the risk of accidental changes. Now, talking about creating the objects themselves. Creating the objects would allow you to manage the resources, and you can create the objects by just going to issue the appropriate commands. For example, you could create an S3 bucket using the AWS S3 MB and then the full path to your bucket. In this case, you want to replace your bucket name with the desired bucket name, taking note that all of your buckets must be globally unique. And then you could also go ahead and upload files to the S3 bucket using the appropriate command, in this case AWS S3 CP, your file.txt, and then your bucket name, where your file.txt will be the absolute path to your file, which will typically be on your local computer, and then the S3, your bucket name, is going to be your uniquely identifiable object bucket name here, which of course got to be globally unique. And then you could also create EC2 instances and create IAM roles, which we are going to be considering a few of them within the console. And then we've seen how we can create objects with AWS. We've got to first install the AWS Command Line Interface and configure it with our access key and secret access keys. We can create objects such as S3 buckets. We can upload objects to the S3 bucket. And then, of course, we can launch EC2 instances, amongst other things. Some of the security practices we've got to bear in mind is enabling role-based access control and multi-factor authentication, encrypting our credentials, using the principle of least privilege, regularly rotating our keys, monitoring and auditing using AWS CloudTrail and AWS Config, and of course ensuring the use of secure endpoints such as HTTPS endpoints or using VPC endpoints. We could also create the AWS Command Line interface profiles to separate our profiles for different environments. So in the next part of this video, we are going to be getting into the console and we're going to be seeing how these things work in action. So stay with us as we do so. Okay, so we are in the AWS documentation page for getting started with the use of the AWS Command Line Interface version 2. And on the page you see here, we've got a number of prerequisites. And it says, I'll just read through that for you to access the service with the command line, you need an AWS account and you need IAM credentials. It also goes on to tell you that when you are running this, the command line interface needs to have access to those credentials and all of those things. So it gives you the details here, which you can go ahead and read through. But I'll just dive right in and provision the user that we're going to need to do that. So after that, you want to go ahead and install and then or update to the latest version of the command line. We see that we have documentation for Linux right here. We've got documentation for Mac OS right here, giving you different options using the GUI installer, the command line installer, and the command line current user. And the one I'm going to be looking at would be the one for Windows. And of course, it gives you the documentation for Windows, where you can install or update the CLI and all of that. So you want to go ahead and download the appropriate installer for Windows 64-bit. So of course you go ahead and download it, and then you want to run all of the appropriate commands. I'm not going to cover that since all of the instructions are listed there. I'm going to drop the link in the chat, and you go ahead and then follow the instructions. So after that, we want to go to the AWS command line interface here. I'll just go to the home page, and from the AWS Management Console, I'll just go ahead and click on IAM, or you could also have searched from the top here. I'll just go ahead and click on IAM, and I want to create the user that we will be needing for that. So I'll go to users. I've demonstrated this before. I'll just go through this quickly. I'll go ahead and click on create user. I'll give the user a name. I'll just call it CLI user, just to give it some context. Now, since I will be using this user only for command line access, I will not provide the user with access to the management console. Of course, bearing in mind that I won't be using this at all for any management console access. So I'm not going to check this box. I'll just go ahead and click on next. Now, what I want to do is I want to ensure that the user is a member of the appropriate group. Now, I'm going to, for purposes of simplicity, add this user to the admin group. But of course, you want to be bearing in mind the least privilege that the user would want if you are going to be using this login here for something other than administration. So you want to bear that in mind. So I want to go ahead and click on next, and that's the user there. That's the username there. And I want to go ahead and click on create user. So I'll go ahead and click on create user, and my user is created. Now, I have created the user. The next thing I want to do is to go ahead and generate an access key and generate a secret access key as well. So to do that, I'll click on the user I have created, and that's the user there giving us the details of the user. I want to go to the security credentials tab right here, and after I've gone there, I want to see, we can see a number of things going on. We can see MFA settings, which we might come back to later. But what we want to do here is we want to go to access keys, and we can see that there is no access key here. It gives us a lot of details and all of that. I just want to go ahead and click on create access key. Now, it gives us the use cases for access key creation. Now, in this case, I want to be using the command line only. Okay, so it gives you alternatives. You can use Cloud Shell. Yes, actually you can, and you can use the command line interface version 2, which allows you to enable authentication through a user in IAM Identity Center, which is currently what we are going to be using. So it just gives you a warning here, and I'll go ahead and click on I understand, and I'll go ahead and click on next, and it gives you the option to create a tag. Now, while creating a tag is not, well, a hard requirement, it allows you to better have some metadata about whatever object we are going to create. So tags basically are key value pairs, allowing you to add some description to whatever objects you are creating. So, but this, for the purposes of this, I want to keep it simple. I want to go ahead and create the access key. So it's created the access key. So we can see here that we have the access key, and then we have the secret access key. Notice that the access key is the public path, and the secret access key is masked. And of course, it's masked for a reason, because you are supposed to be the only one that will have access to it. So take note that once you exit the screen, you will not be able to get back to the screen. So it is a good idea to download the CSV file that's got the details of this. So I'll go ahead and click on download, and of course we have the access key downloaded and the secret access key, of course, in a CSV file, and then I'll click on done. All right, so we have created an authentication scheme to be able to get into AWS and perform some activities from the command line. interface. Now, but there could be some use cases where you have more than one AWS account, or you want to do things in other AWS regions or AWS environments, maybe such as a test environment, a dev environment, or a production environment. So, how would we manage such scenarios? Now, the answer to that question is we've got to create profiles. Now, for example, if I come here and say AWS configure, for example, you will definitely see that it takes me to the access key ID, which is what I had before, and a secret access key ID. It takes me to a default region, and then, of course, it gives me the output. But if I had another environment and I wanted to issue commands against that environment, maybe against the region, so how would I do that? Now, the simple answer to that question would be I'd have to create a profile. So I'll go ahead and issue the same AWS configure command. But this time I'm going to include a parameter called profile. And then I'll give my profile a name, and I could call it, for example, my test, for example, environment, for example. Okay, and if I go ahead and issue that command, notice that it prompts me now. In the first instance, I already had an ID, a secret access key, a default region, and a default output format. But in this case now, it prompts me to go ahead and put in an access key ID. I'll go ahead and just put in the same thing as I had for the first case, just to keep things simple. So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll put the secret key access key ID again, like I had in the previous case. And then this time around, to make it different, I'll just go ahead and put a different default region for this profile. I'll just call it EU, for example, West 1. And then I'll go ahead and enter. And then for this one again, I want to put in a default output format of, maybe I'll just say text, for example, which is the other way that we can do that. So how now will I be able to access this environment here? Of course, I would, each time I want to access the environment, I'll go ahead and use the profile that I have just created. So I have created another profile right here. So how can I use the profile, or how can I create objects in that profile that I just created? So it's simple. I just have to go ahead and now issue the commands. Like we can see here, I'll issue the commands just like I did before. AWS S3 make bucket. I'll specify the bucket name. But in addition to that, I'll specify the profile parameter and go ahead and, of course, indicate the profile. So if I run this command now, of course, it goes ahead to create the bucket. And let's go ahead and see what is going to be different within the command console. I mean, within the AWS console, to see exactly how this bucket that is created from this profile will be different from the bucket I had created from the previous profile. Remember that in this current profile, I changed the default region and I changed the default output format, but every other thing, of course, was the same. In your own case, if you want to go ahead and create a profile for another environment, maybe even another account, then of course you'll be sure to take note that your AWS access key ID and your secret access key ID will be as is appropriate for the environment that you want to have access to. So let's go ahead and see what we will be having in the bucket that I have just created. So we are in the AWS Management Console. We'll go ahead and click on General Purpose Buckets. And of course, this is the bucket we created initially. And of course, it's the demo test VBA 2024-25-12 bucket. If I come here now and do a refresh, we see that we have an identical bucket. Of course, the only difference is while the first one is 25, the other one is 26. Now, another important thing you are going to notice here is that the first bucket is in the first region, which is against my default profile. And the second bucket is in the second region, in this case, EU West 1, which is the second, which is the region that is associated with the second profile that I created. So that's one typical way you can create profiles that will allow you to run commands against different AWS environmental settings. And that's basically how you would do that. Okay, so the next thing we are going to be discussing is how to use multi-factor authentication with the AWS Command Line Interface. Now, to do that, we've got to, first of all, issue a specific command. And this is the command we're going to be issuing here. It's the AWS STS get session token. You want to get the serial number of the MFA device and a token code from the device, of course, and then you want to specify the duration in seconds. Now, some of the things we need to do, we are going to be getting from the AWS Management Console. For example, the ARN of the device. And of course, I'm going to show you how we will go about doing that. So we are in the AWS Management Console, and I want to go to the IAM homepage. I'll go to IAM, and I'll go and click on users, and I'll select the username that I want to use to generate the MFA credentials. So I'll go ahead and click on security credentials. And right here, I want to go to the area called multi-factor authentication. Currently, we see that MFA is not assigned. So I want to go ahead and click on assign MFA device. Now it gives us, of course, the different MFA devices that we have. We can specify a device name, and of course, we can all go ahead and specify other kinds of things as well. So we have the option here to specify passkey or security key. Of course, I want to go ahead and specify an authenticator app. I can go ahead and give it a name. I can call it my MFA device, for example. And I've specified the authenticator app. I want to go ahead and click on next. It prompts me to set up the device. Of course, I have to install a compatible application such as Google Authenticator, Duo Mobile, Authy, and all of that. The one I will be using, which I have already installed, is the Duo Mobile. And then, of course, I want to go ahead and click on Show QR Code. So when it specifies for me to show the QR code, I want to go ahead and open the Authenticator app, and I want to use that QR code. So I'll go ahead and scan the QR code. So we'll go on and add the first MFA code from the device. Wait like another few seconds, and then we'll add the second MFA code. And then we want to go ahead and click on add MFA device. So we now have the MFA device that we want to go ahead and add. Now, what is of utmost importance to us is this number here, which I'm going to go ahead and copy because we are going to be using it shortly when we do the configuration. So we want to go ahead right now and configure the STS get session token. We now have the token serial number, and the other parameter we are going to be putting in is the token code, which is going to come from the MFA device itself. So I'll go ahead and input all of the parameters. So I'll go ahead first and change this to the ARN serial number. I'll just add that there. And then the token code, which I'm going to get from my MFA device. So I'll go ahead and ensure that my device is open. I'll plug in the code. And then the code here is 287666. And I want to specify that the duration should be 3,600 seconds. So I'll go ahead and do that. And we have everything that we need. We can see here that we have an access key ID, a secret access key ID, and then of course we have the session token, which is all of this right here. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and create a profile, which I'll do by specifying the AWS configure. I'll specify the profile parameter, and then I'll specify the profile name, which I'll call my MFA profile, for example. So I'll just go ahead and enter this. It specifies me for the access key ID, which I'll copy. The secret access key ID, which I'll also copy. And the default region, I'll say US East 1, for example. And the default output format, which I'll call JSON. Okay, so I now have the profile. We'll just do one more configuration before we put everything to the test. So stay with me. So I want to go ahead and open the credentials file. If you are in Windows, this is a Windows specific demonstration. You want to go to the C drive, you want to go to the users, you want to go into the folder for the logged on user, and there will be a folder here called -AWS, which you will open, and then you have the credentials file there. Of course, you want to open it, and then you are going to make direct edits to the credentials file. Okay, so I've opened the credentials file in Visual Studio Code. I want to go ahead and put an entry here for the session token. I'll just create an entry there. I'll just go ahead and specify the AWS _session_token and put in all of the details there. And then I want to save the file, and I'm ready to begin to try some of the things that we did previously. All right, so I can now go ahead and perform some other activities like using my profile my MFA profile, which I've created and configured appropriately, I can now go ahead and list some of the buckets that we have within all of my environments using my MFA profile. So this command is going to list all of the buckets, and it's going to be using my MFA profile, which is basically the AWS S3LS profile. So I'll go ahead and type it. And of course, it gives me the two buckets we had created already. We could do every other thing with this MFA profile and it will just work. But of course, take note that it has the additional factor of authentication, which we have configured, talking about the MFA. So that brings us to the end of this demonstration. I hope you learned something. Thank you very much for staying to the end. And of course, see you in the next one. And Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.